Okay, I'm going to tell you a story that is a lot of fun. It's about the earthquake in 2010 in Chile. Now, this earthquake was an 8.8 earthquake on the Richter scale. It is tremendously powerful. You have no idea the power of that earthquake, and I'm going to tell you all about it. Let me just say, my vision perhaps is a bit skewed because I just have to say it was one of the high points of my life. I came face to face, as it were, with nature's power. This was a trivial thing in terms of geology, right? But this earthquake, as I experienced it, was without question the most frightening thing that ever happened to me on a physical level. It was also one of the most exhilarating things that ever happened to me. There's nothing in my life that can quite compare to it. Now, other people, of course, view an earthquake like this very differently. Some of them view it traumatically. Some people lost loved ones and friends, and for them, I have nothing but compassion and sorrow. And I mean no disrespect towards those people. I mean no disrespect towards the recent victims of the Mexico earthquake. I'm only speaking about my subjective experience, what I saw, how it was. And what I felt, because like I said, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And let me explain what happened. Okay, so this was on a Friday night. I was at home, and at this time I lived on the 15th floor of a building, of a tower. And this tower, this building, overlooked a golf course in the middle of Santiago. Now this is important. So the bedroom had a floor-to-ceiling picture window overlooking the golf course. And I didn't have any curtains on it because it was so high up that I was guaranteed privacy, if you will. So I was in bed at 10:30 that night. Now, I was in bed early because I was under the weather. I had like a cold, it just didn't feel very good. So I'd had the opportunity to go out that night, but I decided not to, just stayed in, and I had a dog at that time, Claire. She was a mutt, like a shepherd greyhound, and she'd been with me at that time 11 years. So we go to sleep, 10:30-ish, and around 3:15, I woke up, like full on, just all the lights are on in my head, as it were. And I woke up at 3:15 and I couldn't go back to sleep. And I have no idea why. There was nothing weighing on my mind at the time. By the way, I was sleeping alone that night. I was perfectly fine. There was no reason for me to wake up at 3:15 in the morning. But all of a sudden I woke up at 3:15 in the morning. All the lights are on in my head, as it were. I just like fully revved up. And so I did the only thing I could think of, which was grab the laptop and just, cruise the internet. And I'm cruising the internet for a few minutes. The dog is sleeping, snoring, as a matter of fact. And this thing that they say that dogs sense an earthquake? Well, it's not true, because Claire was just sleeping, belly up, just sleeping, happy as could be, when the earthquake hit at, I believe it was 3:37 a.m. Now, let me tell you how it was. The very first thing that happened was that all the lights went out. All the lights went out. The router went out. Everything went out except my laptop. The laptop was the only source of illumination, and what started coming in through the big picture window. Okay, just to set the scene. So the lights all snapped off just as the earth started shaking just a little bit. And it was shaking for the longest time. It was shaking and shaking more or less at the speed that my hands are going. Just shaking and shaking, and then it just started getting more and more. And the vibrations were no longer just short little things, they were longer. And I tried to get out of bed, tried to stand up, but the building was whipping around in it felt like a circular motion. Not up and down, because I was in Chile for the 85 earthquake, which was actually two earthquakes, one after the other. There was a 7.7, and then 3 minutes later, a 7.5, I believe, or the other way around, I forget. But that was back in 85, and I'd been at my girlfriend's when that earthquake hit. and it hit like in the middle of a Sunday afternoon, right? And that one, you know, it had been like up and down, or at least I'd felt it up and down. But this one, no. But it might have been because I was in the building, because the building was whipping around. And it was whipping around so hard that I couldn't stay on my feet. I kept falling down onto the bed. The dog had woken up and was, you know, crying sort of, but I could barely hear her because I could hear the whole clatter of everything in the apartment just clanging and crashing. I could hear the bookshelves falling. I could hear everything in the kitchen shattering. You know, and it just everything was in motion. I had this big old TV that was on wheels, right? And it was like moving around. And then I could feel the bed was moving around, even though the bed didn't have wheels, right? And the whole building is moving. And I was thinking to myself very clearly at that moment that there was absolutely nothing for me to do. A strange kind of fatalism befell me. I felt to myself that there was nothing I could do, and if I died, if the building collapsed, there was absolutely nothing I could do. There was no place where I could run. And so and consciously, I decided that the only thing I could do was to pay attention to this experience, to just pay attention to it. There was no thought in my head of any possibility of escape. I felt completely, and I think that this is why it has had such a tremendous impact. It was one of the few moments in my life when I felt a sense of complete and utter surrender, of a sense that there was absolutely nothing that I could do. Being smart would not alter my fate. There was nothing for me to do except experience the moment. In a weird way, it is one of the few times in my life when I have been completely in the moment. Because there was absolutely nothing I could do. There was no way that I could get down 15 flights of stairs and get out of the building if it were to collapse. There was nothing. I couldn't even move out of the room I was in because it was whipping around so hard. I'm telling you that it was whipping around like a good 5-7 feet from side to side. There was simply no, I was literally I was bouncing, you know, on the bed, you know, bouncing down and up. It was just absurd. And here was the dramatic thing. I looked out the picture window, right? And I could feel the building going backwards and forwards, right? And side to side, like this kind of motion. And I was looking out the picture window, right? And I could see the buildings because you see there was the golf course, and on the other side of the golf course there was another large avenue, and there were buildings that of course had been built there that were facing the golf course, because the golf course had been installed way back when that area of the city was just, you know, countryside, right? Just cows and stuff, right? And then over the decades the city had grown until it had finally surrounded the golf course, and so all these high-rise buildings were facing the golf course. Right? And I could see on the other side, okay, I could see the avenue on the other side and the buildings. Now it was all dark except for the lightning strikes. And that's what I call them. This was white lightning, because you see on the other side of the avenue, I could see the you know, those transformers that convert direct current to alternating current, or alternating current to direct. I always forget. Anyway, you know those big transformers, because in Chile they're on concrete posts precisely because of the earthquakes, and so they were up there on these concrete posts, and because of the movement they were shorting out. They were shorting out spectacular. They would send these bursts of white lightning flashing up into the sky. It was like these enormous, you know, photographic flashes of all these different transformers exploding, right? And as they were exploding, and as these flashes of white were happening, it was this white light flashing, like paparazzi flashes, right? I could see the buildings on the other side because they were all dark, because all the electricity had gone out, and I could see that they were moving independent of one another, right? It was the most incredible sight I've ever, it was just indescribable. Well, I'm describing it to you, but the impact of it, of seeing these enormous buildings moving, independent one of the other, and almost like seeming that they were about to crash into each other. It was incredible, right? And I could see it, and not only that, I could see that happening, but the picture window itself, which had, for over the decade that I'd lived in that apartment, the picture window was moving, right? Forward and around. The vista I was beholding was moving. It was incredible, right? And so that happened. That was going on for like, I don't know, it went on for 3, 4, 5 minutes. I forget how long it was. It seemed an eternity, and it seemed like I was in a different dimension. So as the building is moving, right, something else I started hearing were all these horns, the alarms from the car alarms. They were all like honking and honking and honking, right? But aside from that, there was no sound. Oh, well, I forgot. No, there was sound. There was the sound of everything crashing in the apartment. Yeah, that was just amazing. I could hear things crashing, and I knew what they were. That was the odd thing. I remember hearing suddenly like several like bombs like exploding from the kitchen, and I knew that I had these like a bunch of these bottles of olive oil. You know how when you have like a dinner party or something, people will come over with like either a bottle of wine or some gift or something, and for some reason a bunch of people had over the years given me olive oil, and I'm not one for olive oil, so they just collected there and collected dust, and all of a sudden the cabinet where they were was just disgorging these things, and they were shattering in the kitchen, on the kitchen floor, right? And it was extraordinary, and it went on and on and on, and then it just sort of started to peter out, and then it stopped. And it lasted, I don't know, you could look it up in Wikipedia how long it lasted. It lasted 3 minutes, but subjectively it was an eternity. And like I said, it was the 3 or 4 or 5 most spectacular minutes of my life. And then I was just standing there by the bed, frightened, but I was completely exhilarated. It was like an adrenaline high. I'm saying I was frightened, but I wasn't actually frightened. I was just excited. It was like a roller coaster. And I think that is what saved me insofar as having a very positive experience. I surrendered completely the notion that I might live or die. I truly did. I feel it, that was a one moment in my life when I just decided, if I die or live, it's nothing that I can do about it, so just enjoy the moment, live the moment, experience the moment. And I suspect, and somebody wiser than I or somebody who actually knows about psychology might be able to explain this, but I suspect that a lot of people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and such maladies, I think it's because they cling to life. I think it's they're clinging to life in the midst of a traumatic and terrifying event over which they have no control over, where their survival is mere chance. I think that's what screws with their head. Whereas if you have somehow gotten to the point of surrender, I've never been one to go into Buddhism or any kind of philosophy of surrender. But at that moment, I felt myself surrendering. For the first and quite likely the only time in my life, I just surrendered my fate. And to me, the experience, devastating though it was, in terms of the impact, it's not traumatic. On the contrary, you can tell. I'm telling you now, and I'm just thrilled by it, right? So anyway, after the earthquake, I got my flashlight. I had a flashlight in my bedroom, and I started exploring the apartment, right? I do recall that it wasn't a full moon, but it was like there was moonlight coming into the living room, I remember. And all of the furniture had been moved around, like somebody had come around and just randomly shoved things aside. There were these big windows in the living room that opened up onto this terrace, and they were big suckers. They had 3 big panes of glass, floor to ceiling, right? And they were roughly, I think they were like 3 meters by 3 meters, something like that. And I must have forgotten to lock them because they'd moved around. I mean, the window was open, right? It was just amazing. All of the furniture was spread out all over the place. Oh yeah, one of the dining room chairs had fallen over. I mean, think of that. A dining room chair had fallen over. How extraordinary, right? So that had fallen over, and I got into the kitchen, and it was a complete disaster. And I remember I was like looking for my cell phone because I'd left my cell phone in the kitchen. And so I'm, with my flashlight, I'm looking for the cell phone, and all of a sudden it starts to ring. It was actually my mother was calling me to find out if it was okay. And I'm looking desperately for it, and I can't find it. Because there's a big mess. There's glass all over the place. And I think I was in sandals or shoes or something. I wasn't worried about the glass. And there was like olive oil all over the place. It was a big mess, right? The kitchen. And I'm looking around, and I spotted something that I'll never forget. One of the weirdest things. There was a a box of salt standing on the kitchen counter, which was weird because that box of salt had been upstairs up in a cupboard, right? And it was standing there, right? But just standing there. It was not fallen over. But there was like a bunch of salt in a little pyramid, and I realized what had happened. The box of salt must have fallen on its side, spilling, and then somehow the force of the movement had brought it back up. The inertia, however it had happened. Because it was like physically impossible. If it had simply fallen out, there was no way that little pile of salt could have been there. And so I realized it must have fallen outside, spilled the salt, and then somehow gotten back up with, I don't know, the earth yanked it up and the inertia, and it got back up. And it was standing there in the little pile of salt. And anyway, I looked around for the phone, and I looked, and I tried to recall where it was. And then I thought to myself, could it be? Because I thought to myself, maybe it's in one of the drawers, because some of the drawers were open and some were closed. And I had recalled that I'd left the cell phone on the counter, the kitchen counter, right above a stack of drawers. And most of them were open, but a couple were closed. So I started, checking them through, and the third one, which was closed, that's where the cell phone was. The drawer must have slid open, the cell phone fell in, and then it slammed shut. And so I pulled it out, and there it was. And I tried calling people, but the lines were busy because, of course, everybody was calling the cell phones. Here's something interesting. I do not, to this day, actually know why. The cell phone towers were working. They were no problem. They were working fine. But there was no light. Now, here's another thing that was good. It was very fortunate in my building. See, my building had been built in 1980. During the Pinochet dictatorship. And now here's what was interesting. At that time, there had been a lot of terrorist activities, and the terrorists, for some reason, had this thing of putting bombs on high-tension towers. And so, periodically, you'd have blackouts in different parts of the city. I don't know why they did that, but the leftist terrorists, that's their thing. So anyway, there had been different parts of the city that would be in periodic blackouts. And I remember, growing up in the early 80s, that this happened all the time. I'm talking every week or two, and it was just annoying, right? So my building, the building I was living in 2010, it had its own electric generator, diesel-powered generator. And so what happened was that when the lights would go off, it would automatically kick in. And so, it must have been like 5 minutes after the earthquake ended, all of a sudden, bling, all the lights are on, right? And our building, because my building was the oldest building in that area, it was the only one with electricity. All the other ones didn't have electricity. But the problem is that even though it had electricity, we couldn't use the elevators for an obvious reason. You see, an elevator has a counterweight. Now, during an earthquake, the whole thing shakes, and the counterweight can easily become dislodged from the track that it's on. So you never want to be in an elevator. You never want to get on an elevator during or after an earthquake, because that counterweight, right, and it could, you know, mess up the works and all that. You're not going to die because the elevator has brakes on it, so that, you know, if the counterweight cable were to break or something like that, the thing will stop and you'll be fine. Okay, I mean, it's not possible really to die in a elevator that falls all the way to the bottom. Well, I'm sure it can, but I mean, a whole bunch of accidents have to happen for that to be a reality. And anyway, common sense tells you, after an earthquake, don't get in a fucking elevator. So of course, we couldn't use the elevator until some technician would come. So I had to walk from the 15th floor, go down the stairs all the way to the ground floor. And along the way, I went to the other apartments to check on older people, because in my building there were a lot of older people, and they were all fine, or all the rest of it. And because in Chile there are so many earthquakes, they were all used to it, or as used to earthquakes, major earthquakes, as you can possibly be. So we got to the ground floor, and it was quite something. You know, there was a oh right. As I go down the stairs, I got to like the 8th floor, I recall, and what happened was a water main had broken at that level, and there was just water just pouring down. I mean, all of the, because it was a 15-story building, right? So every floor above the 8th floor, the drinking water, thank God, not sewage, drinking water was draining out of the pipes and just flowing down, you know, because there had been a break in the main, because there was no more water flowing up, but all the water that was already in the pipes above the 8th floor just drained out and just caused like a big mess. It was a big flood kind of thing, but not a big flood. It was, you know, just an annoyance. So I got down to the ground floor. And you know, there were other, you know, homeowners, other people, everybody in their pajamas and what have you, and some of the older people were very scared, and some of them were taking it, you know, just like taking it in stride kind of thing, that it was just, you know, part of the deal. And what's interesting, that the 2010 earthquake, which was major, it was 8.8, what we felt in Santiago was roughly the equivalent of 8.4. Now, the fact that I was at the time on the 15th floor, some scientist friend said, oh, well, that would be the equivalent of like 8.9, 9.0. Well, yeah, I don't doubt that, okay? Because the building, you have no idea how much it moved. But anyway, and that was the other thing that I was sort of shocked. When the earthquake happened, and this feeling of elasticity was going on, the building feeling like it was just made of silly putty, moving around like that, you know? It's sort of like, mentally I thought to myself, the building is no longer solid. But then after the earthquake, there was this feeling, oh, the building is solid again. And it was really weird, because I would touch the building, you know, different columns and whatever, and I thought to myself, well, when are you going to be unsolid again? It was weird. You know, it was just a bizarre feeling. That feeling that for a brief moment, everything concrete, hard, made of rebar and all the rest of it, so solid, so dependable, all of a sudden had gone elastic like it had. It was just incredible. Anyway, one of the things that everybody noticed was that it was, you know, the middle of the night. It was 3:45 in the morning by this time. By the time I got down, it was like 3:45, 10 to 4, something like that. And we were sort of like organizing ourselves to see what was what, and we were very worried, because you see, the outside of the building was covered in brick, but not actual brick, because the building itself was concrete and rebar, necessary of course for the earthquakes, right? If it had been made of brick, it would have collapsed. But it was sheathed, not in brick, but like a brick veneer. And we were worried that sheets of brick veneer might have fallen off. And that was one of the things I was concerned about with a lot of the buildings in the downtown area in Santiago, was that not a lot of these buildings were, you know, basically encased in glass. And I'd always thought that if the earthquake came, all those sheets of glass would fall and act as guillotines, potentially killing all the people below, right? But anyway, that actually didn't happen, which I was very surprised. I mean, they obviously knew what they were doing. Now, insofar as my building is concerned, some parts of that brick sheathing, that brick veneer, had fallen off. But in general, the building was in okay shape. And eventually some structural engineers would come and check it out and say it was A-okay. There were some interior walls in my apartment that were broken and had to be repaired, and a lot of other damage going on, but what have you. But all in all, the building was in pretty good shape. Now, when you go to Wikipedia, there's a picture of a building that collapsed. Like a building that collapsed in Concepcion, which is closer to where the earthquake happened, the epicenter of the earthquake. And what's interesting about that building, okay, is that, see, that building didn't pancake. Because you see, a lot of what happened in Mexico, of all those people dying, what have you, is that, see, you have two floors, okay? Now, these two floors, they have columns holding them up. There's one floor and there's another floor. And this is concrete and this is concrete. And there are concrete pillars holding them up. Now, because of the force of the earthquake, they go like this, and the torque breaks those columns holding it up. And so as they break and they shear off, the floor collapses on the one below, and the collapse and the force of that pushes them all down, and they pancake, right? That happened a lot in Mexico, okay? It happened a lot in that Mexico earthquake that just happened. It happened a lot in the 85 earthquake in Mexico that happened shortly after the 85 earthquake that happened in Chile. And anyway, the thing is, that didn't happen in Chile because we know better. We have earthquakes every 25 years. There have been an earthquake in 2010, in 1985, in 1960, and I believe a major one in 1938. So think about it. The last three earthquakes, 60, 85, and 2010, happened exactly 25 years apart. Almost to the day, by the way. It's kind of extraordinary. Anyway, that building that I mentioned in Concepcion, that appears in the picture of Wikipedia, well, that one didn't pancake. It toppled over. Because what happened was that the earth underneath the building shifted. Now, in such a situation, the building it's impossible for the building to not fall over. There's no way that you can, first of all, anticipate that or prevent it. Okay? And so, it was just, it just happened, and it couldn't be avoided, and so it fell over. But what's interesting is that most of the people in that building survived. See, because if a building pancakes, forget it. You're going to be crushed. There's no way to survive that. It's over, okay? But if a building topples over and you're inside a relatively small bedroom, you're going to be tossed around. You're probably going to break some bones, but you'll live, or more likely than not, you will live. Most of the people in that building that toppled over, they survived. Most, not all. I do believe some died, and that's a terrible thing. Now, about 500 people died from that earthquake. And the people who died, or 540 people died, and most of them died from the tsunami. Because see, this was the middle of the night, right? 3:30, 3:45 in the morning. And there were some people living in houses along the coast, and they didn't evacuate. Now, one of the things about Chile is that, see, because it is a continental shelf crashing into the Pacific, the coastline of Chile is extremely steep, okay? And so it is easy for people who are near the beach to quickly climb to higher ground, okay? But those people either did not know that they were in danger or what have you, but what happened was that a few minutes after the earthquake, I think about 15 minutes, half an hour after, I mean, you'd have to look it up in Wikipedia, the tsunami came and washed them away. And most of those 540 people who died, most of them died in the tsunami. Now, a tsunami, you think it's like a giant wave, you know, like a giant wave, like, you know, those beautiful waves in Hawaii, you know, that they break on the top. No, no, no. A tsunami is simply just like water just starts coming in. Look at video from the Phuket earthquake in 2004, was it, or 2005, the Christmas Day one? The water just starts coming in. It's just a lot of water with a lot of debris. Okay, now the debris is what kills you. Okay, and the water starts rushing in. You get now, The damage that the earthquake inflicted in Chile was substantial, but it was recoverable. And in point of fact, there was a bump in the economy because of the problem. Now, a big problem that happened, though, was that after the earthquake, a lot of people took the opportunity to start looting. Okay, now this happens in every natural disaster in every country on Earth. Okay, and the president at the time, Michelle Bachelet, she was literally supposed to hand over power like a week later. Okay, now she refused to send the military out onto the streets to prevent looting, and this was a mistake. Her government actually created a lot of self-inflicted problems because, you see, after an earthquake, after a major disaster, people panic. At the same time, bad people use it as an opportunity to do bad things, mostly steal. Also, people tend to panic because they think, well, maybe an earthquake is going to happen. And so the rules of civil society after a major natural disaster sort of get pulled apart. And you need somebody to reestablish authority quickly after a natural disaster. Now, traditionally in Chile, what happened was that the second there was an earthquake, the military would go out on the streets and just, stop everything, okay? Because a lot of people take the opportunity to loot and steal and just, be criminals. Out of malice or out of panic, it doesn't really matter. The effects are the same. Now, Bachelet didn't want to do this because of some stupid ideological reasons. She was a socialist and she was an idiot. And she decided not to, and for 2 days, criminals were basically running riot. And finally, it was basically the entire parliament said, you have to put troops now, okay? Because what was happening was that a lot of people in their panic, in the growing panic, they started assaulting trucks, hijacking trucks that were bringing in water and food supplies to different regions of the country that needed them. Do keep in mind, Chile is a long, thin country. Some of the country was, some of the roads and railways and what have you were cut off. Okay, so they were only accessible via airplane, and that created problems because a lot of runways had to be checked to make sure that they hadn't been damaged by the earthquake. In point of fact, the main airport in Santiago was closed for several days while they did a lot of checking to make sure that the runway was okay, and also to clean it. Because what happens in an earthquake is that a lot of dirt and debris gets tossed up into the air. And the city was like smoggy for like a good day and a half, 2 days, I guess. I can't recall offhand, to tell you the truth. But I remember the city being smoggy in the subsequent days. It was dirt. It was dirt that had been tossed up by the earthquake. So anyway, I've gone on now for half an hour. So I think I'm going to end it here. But basically that was a story. It was quite something. There's no real lesson to be learned from this particular story time, I suppose, other than earthquakes are cool. I know that just sounds incredibly juvenile and stupid, but it's the truth. I mean, I can't say that I felt that I was near death. Okay, as I said before, I did not feel that I was close to death, but there was a sense of surrender. And it was a powerful emotion. It was a powerful moment in my life. Like I said, I feel just nothing but sorrow for the people who died. But on a personal level, there's nothing more invigorating than living through something that could very well easily have killed you. And that's the feeling I have now. I could have easily died in that situation. Something could have fallen on my head, not like the building collapsing or anything like that, but just, the feeling is indescribable. And I feel lucky to have experienced that moment.